Alright, is everybody ready to begin? Good. My name is Bart Marek. I have been a professional presenter for over 8 years. I've spoken over 4,000 hours on stage and spoken over 50,000 people in all different parts of the world. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to teach you some professional speaking techniques through body language that you can use on stage to exude more confidence, feel more comfortable in your presentation, and also make your audience feel more comfortable and more receptive to your message. We're going to focus on 3 distinct parts of the body. We're going to start off and focus on what to do with your body as well as your legs and feet on stage. Second, we're going to talk about how to use your arms as well as your hands. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit about how to use your head as well as facial expression throughout your presentation. The basic posture that we want to exude on stage is going to be confidence. We want to be open and confident with our audience. This basic stance that we're going to take is for the most part this. What I'm doing here is my lower body, I have my feet roughly at about a 90-degree angle open to the audience in front of me. I'm now going to take my upper body and slightly twist it to stage left to focus on the left side of the room. And what this allows me to do is to have my lower body engage stage right, my upper body engages stage left at that point. So I'm speaking to the whole entire room at once. Also taking this position allows me to move my head back and forth on stage and look at everybody in the room basically at one time. At the same time that I'm doing this, one stance that I'm avoiding is what I refer to as the gunslinger stance, which is where you'll often see some speakers on stage with their feet pointing directly out to the audience, their body straight forward in the direction that they're speaking. And basically what we're doing here is we're only speaking to a couple people right in front of us, and we're alienating the rest of the room. And at the same time, the gunslinger stance has something of an offensive connotation to it. So we're going to avoid looking directly at our audience face on the gunslinger. And to give you another example too, if you look at most social dynamics where you have 2 or more persons speaking with each other, rarely will you ever see people speak one-on-one directly facing each other. It's uncomfortable. Most times persons kind of stand slightly at an angle to each other and speak kind of to their side. And we're going to try the same thing on stage, but we're going to make sure we open up to the whole room by simply opening our feet up at about a 90-degree angle below us to the group in front of us, and then turning our body slightly to the other side of the room so we engage everybody in the room at one time. Also, when we're on stage, one key is we want to be moving across the room. As we move back and forth across the room, 2 key points is we want to avoid turning to our side at any one point, so we'll walk across the room, and if we ever need to go to the back of the room, we're never going to turn our back to the audience to walk to the back of the room. If we need to move from side to side across the room, we're going to do it very simply by sidestepping and making sure that our chest, our forward body, or the front of our body is still engaged with the audience as we move back and forth across the room. And as I move from stage right to stage left, now what I'm going to do is open up my feet to the group on stage left, and I'm going to turn my body slightly to the audience over on stage right, so that way I'm engaging everybody throughout the entire presentation. Next, let's focus a little bit on what to do with the arms as well as the hands on stage. The arms in general should be kept close to the body, to the torso, slightly engaged at the forearm. By keeping our arms inside of our body between the waist and the shoulder line, this is a comfort zone. By keeping our arms inside of here, we're showing the audience we're comfortable on stage, we're engaged with them, we're receptive and open to listening to them as well. We want to avoid moving the arms further away from the body, because however we do this, this gives the perception of an animal in the wild in a defensive mode, trying to look bigger than they are. This is more and more defensive as we move the arms higher. And then as we start to see the arms cross above the shoulder line, now what happens is the arms have moved into basically a plea for help, distress signal. So we're going to avoid ever moving the arms above the shoulder line, and we're going to keep them here by the sides. In general too, we also want to avoid ever taking the arms too far below the waistline. As we start to let our arms relax and move too far below the waist, what this does is it pulls our upper body into a defensive gesture, where we start to see the shoulders come forward, enclosing the chest. We see the head come down, covering the neck. Covering this area of the body becomes more of a defensive gesture. We're covering our internal organs. So we're going to avoid that by simply keeping our arms slightly engaged between the waist and between the shoulder line throughout the presentation. Now, what do we do with the hands? The hands are some of the most effective tools you have as a speaker on stage. The basic hand position that we want to take is this. It's the open palm with the closed fingers. When we keep our hands in this position, it shows we have nothing to hide, we're open. It's almost like a handshake. It's almost like an offering that we're using throughout the presentation to our audience at that point. One key to using this gesture is we want to move our hands in unison with each other. We don't want one hand doing something completely different than the other hand. It typically shows you're off balance, it shows you're being erratic in your message, so we want to keep continuity in our presentation by moving our hands together. Imagine as you're speaking on stage as though you're holding a beach ball, as though you're moving it around, so therefore you're going to keep your hands together, or keep your hands doing the same gesture as you're moving throughout the presentation. Also, when using your hands, a couple of gestures we want to avoid. Obviously, we always want to avoid ever putting our hands in our pockets. This shows somebody who's disengaged, who doesn't have the energy to take their hands out of their pocket to show any type of respect to those you're speaking to. And also, some persons perceive it as having something to hide. Keeping your hands in your pocket, showing you want to keep something to yourself. So we always want to be open, non-defensive, keeping our hands out of the pockets. As well as we want to be careful with pointing on stage. Often you'll see speakers point with a single finger point to persons in the audience, which is terrible, or to different objects or different positions in the room. We want to avoid the single finger point because this is a very accusatory gesture. When we do this, I mean, look at how this looks. If I was pointing at you with one finger, think about how that makes you feel. Versus if we point with our whole hand. If we were to take the whole hand and point to somebody in the audience, it looks more like an offering than it does as though I'm pointing at somebody in the audience. So when we do need direct attention by pointing to something on stage or someone in the audience, we're going to do so by opening up with full hand and pointing with that single hand moving forward at that point. Also, when using hands on stage, in general, we want to avoid any positions where the hands clasp in front of the body. There are a lot of different hand gestures that you'll see persons use on stage. Very often you'll see gestures such as this one. This is often referred to as the crow's nest. It's a defensive technique. It looks like a prayer position. It's basically someone who's looking for a different outcome. You may also see what we refer to as the steeple, where you see hands put together, sometimes at the chin. This is again somebody who's looking for a different outcome, somebody who doesn't like what they're hearing. You may also see what is called the Monty Burns. We want to avoid this at all costs. This is a very aristocratic stance. It's a very elitist kind of gesture. We don't want to be offensive to the audience, so we're going to keep the hands apart from each other, moving, doing the same things with each other on stage with that open palm, closed finger grasp. At the same time too, keep your hands away from your face on stage. Sometimes we get a little itch on the side of our cheek, maybe we want to scratch the back of our head real quick. If you need to touch your head at any one point, stop speaking. Stop speaking on your topic, scratch, and then move on. Because imagine if you were sitting at a poker table and the person across from you gets their cards, looks at them, and all of a sudden they start putting their finger down their collar, they start scratching the back of the neck, touching the ear, picking at the side of their eye. These are deceit gestures. These are persons who have, this is a gesture that tells the person listening that I have something to hide. And whether the audience is aware of that being a deceit gesture or not, subconsciously, they're going to perceive it that way. So we want to avoid coming in, touching the face as we're speaking throughout the presentation. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about what to do with the head and a little bit about facial gestures as we're speaking as well. In general, your head should be kept, or chin I should say, should be kept parallel with the floor while you're speaking throughout the presentation. What we want to avoid is moving our chin down. Again, this moves into a defensive gesture, covering the neck, shows somebody who's looking to press, somebody who doesn't like what they're doing. And obviously we want to avoid moving our chin at an angle higher than the floor because this gives a very elitist, kind of snobbish demeanor while we're on, or gesture while we're on stage. So we're going to avoid moving our nose in the air or pointing too far to the ground by just keeping our chin level with the ground as we're speaking throughout the presentation. Lastly, one of the most important gestures that you can use on stage is very simply a smile. Smile shows the room that you're comfortable, you enjoy the presentation, what you're doing. The hard part about smiling on stage is oftentimes we're forced to do what is called a forced smile, where we are being introduced, we look at the audience, and we do one of two things. We do what is called the closed lip smile, or we do what is called the clenched jaw smile. Neither of which look real happy. To give a true smile on stage, what we want to do is what's called a recall moment, where we think of someone we love, some time that we had that we really enjoyed, where we can recall that moment. And as we do that, it'll make the brain create a true smile during your presentation. Think about how to use your brain to create your body as you're speaking on stage and create that true smile to make your audience more comfortable. Folks, my name is Bart Marek. I am an independent contractor teaching skills in sales, public speaking, as well as presentations. Please feel free to contact me at Bart, B-A-R-T, Orlando, O-R-L-A-N-D-O, @hotmail.com. BartOrlando@hotmail.com. Thank you very much. You have a great day.